Today's daf going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Kuf Nun Dalid. We're now going to go back to the Mishnah. So in the Mishnah yesterday, we learned that there's a machloka between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis, which we kind of understood in a particular way. Today, we're going to see that there's two ways to understand this machloka. So the Mishnah said, we have a case where the document didn't say that it was written when the person was on their deathbed, didn't say it was written when they were healthy. Today, we're going to learn that most documents either had a language that said, while the person was walking in the shuk, which means they were healthy, or while this person was lying in their deathbed, which means they were in their deathbed. And this one didn't say anything. So we don't know what to do with it. So the question is, who do we side with and on who lies the burden of proof? For that, there was a machloket. Rabbi Meir said, we assume that the people who get the gift are in the right. And unless we prove the person was sick, they get to keep it. The Chachamim say the exact opposite. And we assume the gift is in the hands of the giver. It hasn't been given yet. And therefore, they get to keep their gift. Then, because of this thing that Rabbi said, we got into this sack of Rabbi and then Abaya's question. Then we basically explained that Rabbi held like Rabbi Natan in this case, and we basically explained that there's this machlokes between Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Yaakov, which we didn't yet understand how the whole thing is connected. Whether we hold by chezkat marikama, the original owner has the chazaka, or we go by chazaka dahashta, what the status is right now. Okay, and then from there we got off into that. Also, they have the same machlokes when it comes to tuma. Okay, we're back to our topic now. We started at the very bottom of Kuf Nun Gimel with just a quote from the Mishnah, the bottom there. We're now going back to the Mishnah because we started off on something else. And the Gemara asks the question, what does each side have to prove? Now, we thought it was pretty obvious that, right, one has to prove, according to Rabbi Meir, the person, the giver, has to prove that the giver was sick at the time. And according to the Rabbi Meir, according to the rabbis, the recipients have to prove that the person was healthy at the time, that the giver was healthy. So that's what we assumed, and that's Rav Huna's position. Rav Huna amar ra'aya be'edim. Okay, that's what you need. You need edim to come and prove whether the person was sick or healthy. Okay, and again, it's a difference of who has to prove it, depending on whether you hold Rabbi Meir or the rabbis. We'll get to that in 1 minute. Rav Chisda Rav Huna amar ra'aya be'kiyum ashtar. This is totally not clear yet what this means. We'll get to it in a minute. Rav Chisda Rav Huna say it's what the rabbis say. Now, they're only talking about the rabbi's position, just so you understand. Raya be'edim could be Rabbi Meir or the rabbis. Each one has to bring witnesses about the status of the person at the time of the writing of the document. According to this, this is explaining the rabbi's position. And you'll see in a minute why. But the rabbis, when they say, if the people receiving the gift want to prove it's theirs, and I would say it like this, all they have to do is, they don't have to prove the person was healthy at the time when they wrote the document. What they have to prove is that the shtar is a valid shtar. How do we do that? Remember from Gittin we learned that? They would go find the witnesses or find in the records the signatures of these witnesses. And if the signatures, like you go to a bank and make sure the signatures are right, the signatures line up, or people testify, oh yeah, I know this person's signature, this is their signature, or we find the people who say, yes, I signed that document, that's enough. They don't have to say, oh yeah, I signed that document, the person was healthy at the time. No, you just need kiyum shtar. We don't yet understand this, don't worry. And now we're going to go back and explain. That was just kind of the headers. Now we're going to explain. Rav Huna amar ra'aya be'edim, going back to the way we understood the machloket, that you have to prove, was the person sick, or prove the person was healthy. Hamiflage beplugta to Rabbi Yaakov or Rabbi Natan, and the siman is maniach. Why maniach? Meir, Rabbi Meir ki Rabbi Natan, mem nun, and Rabbanan ki Rabbi Yaakov, yud chet, Yaakov and Chachamim. Okay, that's just a good way to remember it. But it's easier to just explain. Rabbi Meir holds that, again, who has to prove according to Rabbi Meir? The person who is sick, who claims, the giver who claims that he or she was sick, has to prove that they were in fact sick. Why is that? Because right now they're healthy. And we go by their status right now, as we called it yesterday, chazaka dahashta, the chazaka of right now. Right now you're healthy. So until you prove otherwise, we're going to assume you were healthy. That's Rabbi Natan. And the rabbis say, no, we go by chezkat marikama, who was the original owner of the item. The original owner was the giver. That's the rabbis. You want to get it from them, from him or her? Prove it. Okay, that's our machloket. So that's kind of the way we understood it. And now we finally understand why they brought this whole sugya with Rabbah and then Abaye's question, which then led us to Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Natan, which was because that's the logic, one way of understanding the machloket in our Mishnah. That's pretty straightforward. But now we're going to get complicated because we're going to start talking about some other topic entirely of kiyum shtara. And we're going to say, so right now we have Rav Huna saying Raya be'edim. Soon we're going to see that another bunch of people held like Rav Huna, and then we're going to see more people held also like this other position. So this was an issue that was a source of debate both in Babylonia. We'll see both in Eretz Israel. We'll get to the sugya later where we say Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan disagreed about this as well. How to understand our Mishnah. Rav Chisda v'Rabba bar Rav Huna Amre Raya be'kiyum shtar. Okay, that's a repeat, and now we're going to explain what they mean. Hamiflage b'mode b'shtar. Now, kiyum shtar can only be the rabbi's position because let's go to the other side. If you say the giver has to prove it, well, the giver doesn't need to ratify the document. To ratify the document would only be bad for the giver because the giver wants to say, I don't want to give the gift, right? To ratify the document basically means this document is valid and we could use it. Who's going to want to use it? The gift recipients, not the gift giver. So therefore, it's only going to be the proof for kiyum shtar is only going to be in the rabbi's position. But what's the machloket? What does Rabbi Meir hold, and what does the rabbis hold? Did Rabbi Meir say? Okay, so let's explain what this means. If I admit to writing a shtar, but I claim that there's a problem with it, okay? And as I say, yes, I wrote this document, but whatever the but could be. Okay, but the witnesses were invalid, but okay, I add some but. Do we ignore my but? And did I already say this is a valid document and the document stands on its own? Or do we accept? Okay, so that's what we're going to read right now. Rabbi Meir Savar, and then we'll connect this to our machloket. Rabbi Meir Savar, modeh b'shtar shektavo eino tzarich l'kaimo. If you admit that you wrote the document, okay, like in this case, our giver admits that the giver gave this money over to somebody gave it as a gift. The giver just claims I was sick on my deathbed. And that's why I did it. Basically gives it a reason why it was written and why it would not be valid. But they already, by admitting they wrote the document, validated this document. And it doesn't say in it anywhere there's shliv meirah. So therefore, according to Rabbi Meir, eino tzarich l'kaimo. Once the shtar is validated by the owner admitting I wrote the document, that's it. It's a done deal. Unless what? Unless they can prove otherwise. In other words, that's Rabbi Meir. The giver can go prove that the giver was a shliv meirah and on their deathbed. But if they can't prove that, the document is totally valid. What's the logic for saying this? Okay, so we'll get to that in 1 minute. Let's just see the rabbi's position, and then we'll understand. Because it'll be easier for me to first explain the rabbi's position and then get back to Rabbi Meir. Rabbanan savrei modeh b'shtar shekatbo tzarich l'kaimo. If I bring a shtar forward and I say, I wrote this document, but, well, how do we know the document's valid? From my admission. But at the same time that I admit, I also say it's not valid. So we can't validate something based on my admission. And then if I say it's no good, we have to kind of accept everything I say. And the Rashbam connects this all to something that's called hapesh asal hu hapesh hitir. We've learned this before. What would be a classic case? What does it mean literally? The mouth that forbade is the mouth that permits. So let's say a woman comes to town, she wants to get married. And she says to the people, and she goes to, let's say, I don't know, like here you go to the Rabbanit. And she says to the Rabbanit, I was married, but I got divorced. Okay, now if she's married, she is forbidden to marry anybody else. But she claims that she got divorced, but she doesn't have the divorce document in hand. So that's a classic case of hapesh asal hapesh hitir. We don't know her from anywhere. We have no idea that she was married. The only reason we know she's married is because of her own admission. And in that same breath, she basically said, I'm also divorced. So the mouth that forbade her by saying I'm a married woman is the same mouth that permitted her, and generally that's accepted. And that's the rabbi's opinion here. The people that validated the document by saying, I wrote it. If someone says I wrote the document, it automatically makes it valid if it's, remember, this is the person who wrote it saying I'm giving you this item as a gift. They're the ones who have everything to lose. If they admit to writing the document, that makes the document valid. But if they say in that same breath, but I was a shchiv meira and therefore I want my gift back, so that could undo it very easily. And it doesn't need kiyum shtar, and that's why the rabbis say, again, what do they say? That the shtar is no good. Remember what they said? If they want to get the gift from the giver, the burden of proof is on them because we believe the giver. Because the giver, while on the one hand admitted to the document, also said, "But I was a shchiv meira." So basically, right, it's done. However, the important part is, according to the rabbis, what does the other side have to do to prove they're right? All they have to do is do kiyum shtar, which is much easier than proving whether he was a shchiv meira or not and finding someone who could testify for, right? They just have to validate the signatures. Once they validate the signatures, we have a document. It doesn't say anything about whether he was sick in his deathbed at the time he gave the gift. So once they validate the shtar, that's good. Because the issue here is the shtar. Rabbi Meir says, why do we side with the recipients? Because Modeh b'shtar shekatvo ein sarich l'kaimo. If I admit to this document and then I say, but there's a problem with it, it's too late for me to say that. And why is that different than the woman who comes forward and says, I was a married woman, but now I'm divorced? Because she has no document in hand. But comes the Rashbam and says, okay, in the words, Dibor Matchil, Rabbi Meir Savar Ein Sarich L'Kaimo, it's a bunch of lines down, sort of in the middle of the page. Distam shtarot harehem ksherim. We normally assume that if there's a document, it's a good document. And b'shtarot lo ne'ma hapesh asar hu hapesh yitir lepaslo. We can't disqualify documents with this hapesh asar hu hapesh yitir law. So once there's a document and someone admits, I wrote the document, that's it. It's done. Even if they say but, we ignore the but because we have a written document in front of us. What more do we need than that? So Rabbi Meir basically claims, which is very interesting, according at least to where the Rashbam and some of the other commentaries understand, this is all based on a pesh asar or a pesh yitir, and that Rabbi Meir thinks that pesh asar or pesh yitir is not relevant when there's a document to show for the isur part, right? Here it's not isur veheter, it's not like ish and you're forbidden to marry, but it's I committed to giving something to somebody else. So until proven otherwise, now what would the proof be for Rabbi Meir? The proof wouldn't be the kiyum shtar. The shtar is already mikuyam. There, the proof would have to be that if the giver wants to get it back, the giver would have to prove that the giver was a shchiv meira at the time. So that would stay the same, but it's based on a different logic. According to the rabbis, the recipients wouldn't have to prove that he was a bari. The recipients would have to prove that the shtar is valid. As soon as they validate the shtar, they can get the money out of the person, okay, out of the giver. So that's the second way of understanding this machloket, totally different than we would have thought. The question of the Gemara is going to be the following. But wait, Rabbi Meir and the rabbis debate this in a different place, in a Braita. Why would you need to bring a Mishnah and a Braita that come up in different contexts that say the exact same thing? In other words, we don't like to repeat unnecessary things. We already know they have a machloket on this issue. So why, again, you have to remember, it's not like it's explicit in the Mishnah that that's the machloket. So if we have a choice of deciding what the machloket is, better to choose something new that says, oh, they argue about some other topic, than choose rather than saying they argue over kiyum shtar. So how do we know this? Tanya, it says in a Braita, ein ne'emanim lepaslo, divrei Rabbi Meir, chachamim omrim ne'emanim. Okay, you're missing some of the background because they're kind of telling you they're not disqualified they're not believed to disqualify it, and they are believed to disqualify it. Okay, who, what are we talking about? Notice it's in plural. We're talking about witnesses here. If witnesses came forward and said, we wrote this document, the witnesses signed on the document, but it was no good, but we were related to each other, but we were too young at the time. Okay, we were minors when we signed it. Okay, all sorts of reasons why they could say, but, okay, so they come and say, we wrote this document. It's the same idea. It's just not the baldin, the person who was the giver in our case. Here it's witnesses. Witnesses said we signed on this document, but it was a problem. So again, Rabbi Meir says they can't disqualify it because it's a signed document and they admit that they wrote it. What better kiyum shtar is there than that? Who cares that they said but? And the rabbi said, what do you mean? They said but. It's important that they said but. They're believed to disqualify the shtar. And again, what would you need to do? You need to do kiyum shtar. Okay, you need to somehow prove that it was a valid shtar. So now the Gemara says, what? So why would you mention this is the machloket here if it's already there? To which the Gemara says, tzricha. No, you need them both. You can't learn one from the other because one is the Baal Din himself, herself, and one is the witnesses. That's two different situations. And what's the difference? Well, itmar bahi, if you had it in this last case we just said about the witnesses, you would say, bahi ka'amar Rabbana, we believe the witnesses in that case according to the rabbis. Why? Mishum da'alima eidim umar ishtara. Two witnesses can come to any document and say this document's invalid. So if they're talking about their own document or they're talking about that document, what's the difference? And as it's true, it's their own document, but why should it make any difference? They would even be more believed. Two witnesses could come and disqualify a witness in court. They could disqualify two witnesses, have a lot of power. Aval hacha, but in our case, who delav kol kamine? Who is he? In other words, this giver is, first of all, nogea b'davar, as we say. Right? He's a party in the case. And one person, right? What power does that person have to do anything? And you might have thought, Emalo, you might have thought maybe the rabbis don't think that we employ hapesha saru hapeshi tir here because it's only one person. So if you had it in the witness case, you might have thought only then. And for the same logic, itmar bahaf, we just had our case, you would say bahaka amar Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says it by us that we don't believe the Baal Din and the shtar is good. Aval bahach emamodilu Rabbanan, but in the case with witnesses, maybe Rabbi Meir would believe the witnesses to disqualify the shtar. They would be believed. Therefore, it's tzricha. That's why you need it in both cases. So that was a side question on this explanation, and we resolved it. Now we see, as I told you before, we're going to see that not only, by the way, I didn't point this out, but we have Rav Huna against Rav Chisda and Rabba bar Rav Huna. That's the son of Rav Huna. So we have his son disagrees with him about how to understand this machloket plus Rav Chisda. So again, Rav Huna thinks it's all about raya be'edim, and that connects with what we learned yesterday with the chazak adat, chazak amerikama, right? And each one has to prove was he bari, was he shchid mira, and we have the second explanation of Rav Huna and Rav Chisda that the machloket all has to do with if someone admits to a document, which that's what happened in our case. The shchid mira said, "I wrote the document, but do we accept the but and do we require kiyum shtara?" That's a motzi mechaver alav haraya. We side with the giver. And if the others can prove kiyum shtar, say it was a valid shtar, then they can get the money. Or Rabbi Meir says you don't need kiyum shtar, and therefore the recipients, it's already mikuyam. The recipients have the right of way. Only if the giver can prove that the giver was definitely a shchid mira, will the giver be able to get the money back. So now Rabba comes along and says, he agrees with Rav Huna's position and says, it's raya be'edim. It's what we said originally. The way we understood it originally, it's all about bringing witnesses. Was the person a shchid mira or were they healthy? So Amalei Abai. Now, Abai is going to question. We always are more interested in the rabbi's position because that's the majority position. We usually hold by the majority. The rabbis say, "Amotzi mechaver alav haraya." That means that if, right, in the absence of witnesses, what do we assume? The giver gets to keep it. So Abai wants to understand why Rabba thinks the giver gets to keep it, according to this understanding. Amalei Abai. Now remember, we said it's chazaka demari kama. Okay, it's because that's where he was the original owner. But Abai kind of questions it first and then says, "My time. Well, what's the reason?" And it's going to be one of those questions. I don't get your reason. If it's because every document of a healthy person usually says in it, while the person was walking on his legs in the shuk, meaning while he was standing on his feet, and, he gave this gift, ubaha lo ktiva, and our document didn't say it, therefore we assume the person must have been a shchid mira, and that's why we side with the giver. And because it didn't say it, shma mina shchid mira. Is that why the rabbis think the default is he's a shchid mira? Adrabah, you could say the exact reverse. What do you mean? Every shchid mira, midekulu ktibu kad ktsiru rami ba'arse. Every shchid mira document says while the person was lying in bed, and halo ktivba, and this says nothing. Shma mina bari habe. Right? He's basically saying it's all right. You could say it one way, you could say it the other way. Either which way we look at it, it leaves us exactly in the middle. So why would the rabbis side with the giver? So, Rabba answers, yeah, you're right. You could say this, you could say that. So what in the end is what tilts the scales? Okay, mamona b'chezkat mari. We leave money in the hands of the original owner. Okay, and that's basically repeating what we said, but in a discussion between Rabba and Abai. Now we're going to see Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. And this is going to be a little confusing because first we're going to start with Rabbi Yochanan holds this, Rish Lakish holds that. And then by the end of today's daf, really toward the end, we're going to do a complete unraveling of the sugya. Okay, and you'll see what I mean when we get there. So be prepared. Ubeplugta to Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Okay, let's say it like this: Ubeplugta. And there's another machloket about exactly the thing we've been discussing. And now we move to Israel, right? Spotlight on what the rabbis in Israel were saying. Until now, we've been in Babylonia. To Rabbi Yochanan Amar Ra'aya be'edim, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, which is otherwise known as Rish Lakish, Amar Ra'aya be'kiyum hashtar. And then we're going to have a discussion between them. Rabbi Yochanan is going to raise a difficulty against Rish Lakish, and then Rish Lakish is going to respond. That's the first part of this section. So this basically splits up into the split we saw before. Comes Rabbi Yochanan and questions Rish Lakish. Eitive Rabbi Yochanan, the Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. He brings up a source, a Tanaitic source, and says, this doesn't make sense according to you. And it's a story. Maaseh b'Bnei Brak. There was a situation that happened in Bnei Brak. There was someone who inherited his father's property. Then he sold the property. That's machar b'nechsei aviv. He sold his father's property once his father died. And then he died. Now, the assumption right now is, and we're going to question some assumptions later in answering the question, the assumption is that the property that he sold was still in his possession. The people had paid the money, but he hadn't given it to the purchasers yet. Then he died. And then the heirs, which were his siblings or some sort of relatives, who, because he didn't have any children, tried to say, hey, this is ours, because look, it's in his possession, and they're going to claim that he wasn't old enough to sell it, okay, without getting into all the details. But if a son inherits his father's property, there's a law that you actually can't sell it till you're 20, okay? Normally we say age of maturity is 13 and 2 pubic hairs. But in this case, they say to sell your father's property, you need more knowledge, life experience. 20 is the age. However, if you don't have simanei bagrut, meaning you don't have 2 pubic hairs, even after you're 20, which is a rare thing, but once in a while it happens, then you're not going to see, you can't sell it until you're 36, I think is the age. So you need to understand that before we get into the case. So now what happened? The relatives come and say, listen, when he died, he was still a katan, okay? Meaning maybe he was over 20, but he didn't have simanei bagrut. So he couldn't have sold it. The sale was invalid. And that's how they try to say, this is ours. Couldn't have sold it. Ubao v'shalu at Rabbi Akiva. Now the question is, who went to Rabbi Akiva? Okay, the way Rabbi Yochanan is going to understand the story is the purchasers went to Rabbi Akiva because who's going to go? The person who wants to get what they're deserving of. So they don't have the property that they bought or whatever it was. Could be metaltalin, doesn't matter. Whatever it was they bought, they don't have in hand right now and they want to get it. So Ma'u libadko, they said, so they asked Rabbi Akiva, can we go check the body and see if there are hairs or not? Little unpleasant, and we'll see as the story goes on. Amar lahem, iatem rasha'im lenavlo. Firstly, he says to them, you can't disgrace a dead body and check for simanim. That's just not appropriate. I don't allow that. Ve'od, and furthermore, and later we're going to see why he have to say two, or a possible reason we'll see. Simanim asuyim lishtano la'achar mitah. It could be he didn't have pubic hairs when he was dead, and now there are. Okay, it's a little strange to think he could grow hairs, but sometimes things change after death. And by the way, the commentaries say it would have to be that he sold it just before he died. Otherwise, he could have grown hairs in between the time he sold it to the time he died. We're trying to talk about when he died. So it's a little difficult also in that sense, which is why maybe perhaps the second explanation might be a better one. Anyway, why is this Rabbi Yochanan's proof for his position? Because he says, Bishlama ladidi da amina raya be'edim. I said the whole proof in our Mishnah was the person of Shchid was the person of Bari who has to prove it. Okay, that all fits in well here. Why? Kevan da amar lekuchot. Now, what's the rabbi's position by us according to Rabbi Yochanan? Hamotzi mechaber alav haraya, because he was the original owner, right? Now, if you say lilekuchot, if what happened was here, where was the property? The property was in the hands of. Now, it doesn't matter, Maria, come here, because the guy sold it. but it was still in the possession of, that's how we explain the story anyway. It was still in the possession of the family, of the person who died, never gave it over yet. The likuchot are coming to take it out of their hands, right? Out of the family's hands. And so they said to the likuchot, Aitu Edim, bring Edim that what? Well, just like with the person of Shchimera with Bari, was the person old or young, right? You have to prove that the person had pubic hairs. Lo eshkechu, they couldn't find anyone who knew the status of the child at the time of the sale. And that's why they went to Rabbi Akiva, Hainu de Ka'atu va'amrule, ma'u libotko. That's why they wanted to check his body, because they were looking for witnesses about the status of the person, which fits perfectly with Rabbi Yochanan's explanation, Raya be'edim. Ela lididach, and now we're going to see why it doesn't work according to the other explanation. Da'amart Raya be'kiyum ashtar. If the issue is that they needed a proof for kiyum ashtar, now let's go through the case. The family admitted that he had sold the property. They just claimed, right? Modeh b'shtar shekatvo. Now, it wasn't them who wrote it, but they admit that he wrote it, and they're the ones arguing for him. And they said, but he was a minor. Now, the question is, right, according to the rabbis, tarich l'kayim. That requires, they already ruined the shtar. If you want to take money based on that shtar, which is what the lekucha want to do, what do they have to do? They don't have to go check his body and check if he was a gadol. All they have to do is do kiyum shtar. If they do kiyum shtar, like in our Mishnah, even though it's not clear the person was a shchimera, if they can be mekayim the shtar that says, I gave you this gift, they could get the gift. If these purchasers can prove we purchased the land, then the document is valid, they'll be able to get it. So why are they checking it? All they have to do is do kiyum shtar and take the property. So that's Rabbi Yochanan's problem with Rish Lakish, to which Rish Lakish says, you really got the details wrong of this story. Why are you assuming the property was still in the hands of the family? And it was the purchasers who went to Rabbi Akiva. You could say it was the opposite. It was in the property of the purchasers. They purchased it. They had the land. Come the family members and say, hey, we want to get the land from you because we think that the document was written when he was a minor. Now why, and the family is coming and their question. Now, why does that help us here? Help Rish Lakish? Because that neutralizes the whole issue of kiyum shtar. This has nothing to do with kiyum shtar. If you're the family claiming that the shtar is no good because he was a minor when he sold it, well, kiyum shtar won't help you. Kiyum shtar only helps the buyers. And in our Mishnah, right, the recipients of the gift, it doesn't help the original owner. They want to undermine the shtar. So kiyum shtar is not an issue here. And that's why this has nothing to do with kiyum shtar, because it's the other side. Okay, it's the side that's trying to, at this point, who's taking away from who? The buyers are the ones who are muchzakim. And the seller, right, the heirs of the seller are trying to take it. Kiyum shtar is totally irrelevant. So that's why Rish Lakish says, and what are they trying to prove? They want to open the grave, and this actually works better, and show that he's a katan, that he doesn't have any hairs, and that will be a better proof, because if it doesn't have hairs now, the assumption is he didn't have hairs when he sold it, and then you don't have to say the sale happened right up against, right before he died, which I said was a problem with the previous. So by flipping the situation, Rish Lakish resolves the problem. And in fact, the Gemara now is going to further prove from the details of the story that Rish Lakish's version must be right, but the proof is going to be rejected. It doesn't matter. Rish Lakish still has an answer, but this proof will be rejected. But let's go with the proof. Hachinami mistabra, it makes more sense to read the story this way. Why? What happened? Rabbi Akiva said, it's really not appropriate to disgrace the body, and they were silent. They didn't complain. So if you say it was his family members, well, mishum hachi ishtiku, right? You could see Rabbi Akiva says, don't desecrate the body. First of all, they're his relatives. They get it. Okay, fine, we won't. But and also it's less of a big deal for them. But right, in other words, they're stuck. They can't get their property back. But it's not as big a deal than if it was the lekuchot. If it was the purchasers, why would they be silent? They could have said to Rabbi Akiva, we paid fair and square for this property. This guy deserves to be disgraced. In other words, this family is trying to take our money away from us, our property away from us that we paid money for, of course we should disgrace the body. So the Gemara says, and therefore the fact that they were silent, didn't say anything, proves it must be that it was the family that was the one having to bring the proof. But the Gemara says, Imishum halo iria, that's not a proof. Hachi kamralu, you could read it like this. And this goes back to why did Rabbi Akiva give two explanations. Hada, firstly, he said to them, you're not allowed to disgrace the body. Ve'od, and furthermore, this was Rabbi Akiva preempting. If you were to say, Zuze shakil linava v'linava, we paid money, we're going to disgrace this body anyway, well, it won't help you because simanim asuyim lishtano la'achar mita. Signs on the body might change after death, and therefore this isn't going to help you. By the way, where did we see this idea of simanim asuyim lishtanot? Do you remember? We saw with the Aguna case about someone trying to identify a person, and there was a whole debate. If they say the person had a mole, maybe the mole, right, when it was here, right, and then maybe the mole could have changed after death. I think there was a machloket about it, whether we say this or not. But anyway, Rabbi Akiva is telling them, don't, even if you think that you deserve to l'navel taguf, it's not going to help you because anyway, we won't accept that as testimony in a court. Okay, that's the first part of the sugya. So we saw, okay, let's just review from the beginning because I don't think we'll end up reviewing at the end. So we started with two debates, right? We had some rabbis lined up on one side, some on the other. What's the debate between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis? Is it who has to bring Eidim because which chazaka do we go by? And I just want to remind you, it's not just chazaka of now and chazaka of before. Both chazakot are different. One is saying chazaka of where the money was or the property was before. And the other is chazaka of what the status of the person is right now. If the person's buried now, we assume they were buried then. If they're sick now, we assume they were sick then. One is a status of the person, and the other is the status of the property. So it's two differences, really. It's do we go by status of the property or the money or the possessions, whatever it was, or and what it was originally, or do we go by the status of the person and what they are now? And that lined up with Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Natan. The second explanation was that the machloket between them all has to do with if the person admitted there was a shtar, which for sure the shchimera admitted they wrote the shtar, they just said, but I was a shchimera, do we accept the but or do we not accept the but? And if we accept the but, then what's the retort? How do you get out of it? Well, you can be makayim the shtar. If you show the shtar is valid, then you can collect, right? Then the recipients can actually collect, even though they don't actually have proof that the person was sick at the time. That the person was healthy at the time. They don't need that. They just need to do kiyum shtar. And then we saw that Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish had the same debate, and Rabbi Yochanan asked this question on Rish Lakish, and it was resolved. Now, because of another discussion between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, as I told you, we're going to eventually unravel this entire sugya and switch a lot of things around. We're going to do a lot of ipuchs. Okay, the one who said that actually says that. The one who said that actually says that, and we're going to switch. So let's see. Some people take out this tashma because it's not really used in this classic way. Anyway, that's an important thing. We're going to just keep moving on. So Sha'al Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, so thank you, Adina. The case with the mole is on Yevamot 120, if anybody wants to look, Kuf Chaf, so you can look it up there. Sha'al Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish at Rabbi Yochanan. Now we just have a question that Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, and from that we're going to have some issues going on and connections, how this connects with things we saw before. Mishnah Bar Kapara. He introduces it by saying, Rish Lakish says to Rabbi Yochanan, there's this Mishnah Bar Kapara, and what he's going to basically say is, after we learn this Mishnah Bar Kapara, Rabbi Rish Lakish is going to ask, is this only according to Rabbi Meir? Because it only seems to fit in with Rabbi Meir. And then Rabbi Yochanan is going to answer, actually, it's according to everybody. Nobody disagrees about this. And that's going to raise all sorts of problems. So let's just read it. I want you to get the structure before we go inside, even though you didn't understand anything yet. Somebody was eating fruits of a field, okay, the produce. They were enjoying the produce of a field. This sounds like we're back to Chezkat Abatim, third chapter of our Masechet. And claims, this is mine. Okay, I'm enjoying the fruits. Comes someone else. Okay, we can say Naomi was eating on the field, or Ruth, let's go with Ruth was eating on the field. She's usually the one who has the issues. And Naomi claims, what are you doing in my field? This is my field. No. Ruth takes out her document. It says Ruth sold the field to Naomi. Oh, or I'm sorry, Naomi sold the field to Ruth. Sorry. Ruth says, Naomi, look, I have a proof. It says Naomi sold the field to Ruth. Or Naomi gave this field as a gift to Ruth. Okay? I have a document to prove it. So Ruth's got a document in hand. If Naomi claims, I don't know what this document is, I've never seen this in my life, so that's a classic case. They disagree whether the shtar is valid or not. Maybe Ruth forged the document. So we go to the court and see if the court can ratify it. Okay, fine. That's a side point. However, now we get to a case of Moder b'shtar shekatvo. Okay? If Naomi says, shtar pasim huze, o shtar amana, it's either a shtar pasim or a shtar amana. I agree I wrote this shtar to you, but don't you remember what happened, Naomi says? You wanted to look wealthy. You wanted to look like you were a landowner. So I told you I would write you this shtar. It's not really true. I did it as a favor to you. We're good friends. You wanted me to do it. I did it. Or it was a shtar amana. I planned to sell you the field. I didn't sell it yet. You didn't give me the money. But I agreed to write the shtar because I trusted you. Amanami lashon emun. Emun is trust. I trusted you, and I knew you were going to eventually give me the money, so I was willing to give you the shtar already. But lo natata li damin, but you never gave me the money. So basically, Naomi admits that the shtar was written, but claims there's a problem with it. This is just like all of our other cases. So now, according to this, what does it say? Im yesh edim halacha charidim. So if there's witnesses that can attest to all this, so great. We have witnesses who say it was a shtar mana, it was a shtar pasim, was it? Okay. That's great. But im lav, if not, what do? Halacha chara shtar. The shtar stands independently. What does that mean? Modeh b'shtar shekatvo ein sarich l'kaimo. It's like what Rabbi Meir said earlier, right? Which is, if we assume the machloket, you have to say, if we assume the machloket between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis is about this, then this follows Rabbi Meir. And that's what he says, lema Rabbi Meir. That hapesh asar wa pesh yitir. Naomi admitted, but she also said it wasn't good. We don't accept the part that she says it's no good, because it's a shtar. There's a document, and the document stands on its own. And the fact we don't need kiyum shtar, why? Maybe I didn't say this explicitly, because you only need kiyum shtar if you want to make sure it's not a forgery. But Naomi said it was a valid document. She didn't say it was a forgery, right? The first option was she said it was forgery. Then you need kiyum shtar. She said, but it was a shtar mana. That's a different story. There's a shtar to be said for it. It's unlikely it was a shtar mana or a shtar pasim. So comes Rish Lakish and asks Rabbi Yochanan, Lema Rabbi Meir Hida Amar Modeh b'shtar shekato ein tzarich l'kaimo. Now remember, Rish Lakish was the one who said that's the machloket between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. So when Rish Lakish is understanding that that's the machloket, he says this sounds like only Rabbi Meir. To which Amar Le Lo Shani Omel Divrei Hakom Modeh b'shtar shekato ein tzarich l'kaimo. Rabbi Yochanan says, I agree that everybody thinks Modeh b'shtar shekato tzarich l'kaimo eno tzarich l'kaimo. I think everyone holds this way. And this fits in perfectly with Rabbi Yochanan, because I don't think that that's the machloket between them in the Mishnah. Okay, that seems so far okay. But we're going to have two problems with this. And because of the second one, we're going to have a big issue here. So the first question is, V'hami flag plike. How could you say Rabbi Meir and the rabbis don't disagree about this? Forget about if you understand our Mishnah this way or not. That's not a problem. But the Braita we saw already today shows what? They argue about this when Eidim come, right? They have an argument. Can Eidim disqualify it or not? Hamiflag pligi ditanya, it should be Tanya Natan. It's a Braita. Ein nemanim lepaslo divrei Rabbi Meir. Chachamim umrim nemanim. There you see, there's machlok of Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. Can we accept the Edim's testimony according to the rabbis? And it does disqualify the document. And Rabbi Meir says no, because Modeh b'shtar shekatvo ein sarich l'kaimo. So it's a machlok. Amar li, right? I just want to make it clear. What bothered Rish Lakish is, why would this bar kapara go by Rabbi Meir and not the majority opinion of the rabbis? To which Rabbi Yochanan answers, everybody agrees on this issue. It's not a machloket. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? Of course not everyone agrees. Well, they say no, and what we used before as a tzricha, we're now going to use as what we suggested and rejected, which is hypothetical on the previous Amud. Here we're going to say that's actually a possible answer to this, which is what? Just because we allow it when the Eidim can disqualify it according to the rabbis doesn't mean the rabbis will think that the person themselves can disqualify their own shtar. Okay? So you wouldn't necessarily say the same thing in our case, which means the rabbis could disagree in the Braita case where it's witnesses, but agree on our case, which was what we said. Maybe you would have thought that, but that's why you need them both. But that was according to the other explanation, that is the machloket between in our Mishnah. Okay, second problem, and this is going to be a bigger problem. Now we're going back to the case with the relatives. So, but Rabbi Yochanan, it was said in your name that the Bnei Mishpacha did right. They were right for complaining, which means if the Bnei Mishpacha were right for complaining, then what happens? What does that mean? That means that, let me just think for a minute. I just lost my train of thought. Right. They complained and said, we want to disqualify the star, right? He was a katan. And they were right for claiming that. So what do you see? Modeh b'shtar shekatvo, according to the rabbis, tzarich l'kaimo, right? And not that everyone agrees that eino tzarich l'kaimo, because they were in the right. To which Rabbi Yochanan responds, he has a response, but we're going to have a problem with his response. Amar le zo elazar amara. Ani lo amarti davar ze me'olam. Don't put words in my mouth. I don't think the rabbi said that because I think I didn't say yaferu b'nei mishpacha, showing that modeh b'shtar shekatvo, right? Sarich l'kaimo. No, I never said that. My student said it. Oh, you think my student says things in my name? My student said it in his own name. It wasn't me. But Amar Rabbi Seira, you can't accept that answer because im yichpor Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Lazar tamido. Okay, I get that he could claim my student said it, not me, but he can't discount yichpor Rabbi Yanai Rabbo. He can't go against Rabbi Yanai, his teacher. It doesn't really mean Rabbi Yanai, his teacher, but he can't disagree with this situation that happened with Rabbi Yanai, and Rabbi Yochanan himself said something of the sort. Let's see. To Amar Rabbi Yanai, Amar Rebbe. Rabbi Yanai said the following, and here there's a problem with the nusach. You have to get rid of the word eino, okay? Modeh b'shtar shekatvo tzarich l'kaimo. Rabbi Yanai says in the name of Rebbe, which is what Rabbi Yochanan before claimed everybody agrees about, that if someone admits they wrote a star, you have to be mekayim the star, okay? You have to validate the document. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, this is not what, this is, sorry. This is what we just had, that Rabbi Yochanan said everybody holds eino tzarich l'kaimo. Now comes Rabbi Yanai and says in the name of Rebbe, tzarich l'kaimo. Now what was Rabbi Yochanan's reaction? Now you expect Rabbi Yochanan's reaction to be, nobody holds this way, because Rabbi Yochanan just said to Rish Lakish, everybody holds you don't need to be mekayim the star. Amar le Rabbi Yochanan, Rebbe, lo mishnatenu, he said, is that not, now here you get to something very shocking. Is that not the machloket in our Mishnah? Chachamim omri, and not only is it the machloket, but what do the rabbis say? Chachamim omrim hamatzim mechaver alav haraya ve'ein raya ela b'kiyum shtar. Wait, the rabbis hold in our Mishnah, that's the machloket. Now, why is this a big problem? Well, eventually we'll get there, but it's a big problem because Rabbi Yochanan said the machloket in the Mishnah is raya be'edim, not raya b'kiyum shtar. So Rabbi Yanai came along and said, you have to be mekayim the shtar. And Rabbi Yochanan says, but isn't that the machloket between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis about whether you have to and whether you're not? And the rabbis hold that you do, that you don't need. So, I'm sorry, Ein Raya Ela B'Kiyum Shtar. In other words, 1 second. Right. Sorry, I got a little confused. Rabbi Yochanan is just saying here, isn't that what our Mishnah is talking about? In other words, isn't that the machloket between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis? Okay, which means that what he said before, everybody agrees is just not true. Because Rabbi Yochanan himself said they disagree about this topic. That's the main point. He's not actually disagreeing with Rabbi Yanai. He's just saying what you said is one person's opinion. This is one of the sides of the opinion. It's the rabbi's position, but right, it's our Mishnah. Okay, now, so because Rabbi Zera says it can't be that Rabbi Yochanan contradicted himself, so he has to explain this whole thing differently. And he has to explain, now let's just go back because it's a little confusing. Rish Lakish started by saying this source that we have about the case of Ruth eating on Naomi's field, and then Naomi saying it was a shtar manash, shtar pasim. And what did they say? What do you have to do? Right? They said, sorry, right. Halachachar edim, right? Ve'im lav halachachar shtar, right? We can go by the shtar. If there's no edim, right, we go by the shtar, and that sounds like Rabbi Meir, who says, Mod b'shtar shekatvo eino tzarich l'kaimo. We don't need to be mekayim the shtar at all, right? We could just follow the shtar. If Naomi has no proof for what she claims, Ruth has a shtar in hand, we go by that. Now, what's the problem? So Rabbi Yochanan had said, no, everybody agrees about that. It's not just Rabbi Meir, everyone agrees, because Rish Lakish's whole problem was, how could that follow Rabbi Meir? Shouldn't it follow the majority opinion? So Rabbi Yochanan just answered, oh, there's no machloket. But Rabbi Yochanan himself says that's the issue in the machloket in our Mishnah. So comes Rabbi Zera, and now we're going to unravel everything, and with that we'll finish. Biram nirim divrei Rabbeinu Yosef. Da Amar Rabbeinu Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Zo divrei Chachamim, Aval Rabbi Meir Omer Moded b'shtar shekatvo shetzarich lekaimo. Rabbeinu Yosef quotes Shmuel as having the flipped version of who holds what. Rabbi Meir is the one who holds you have to be Mekayim the shtar, and the rabbis are the ones who hold that you don't have to, and that's the opposite of the way we've understood them this whole shiur. So now they say, wait, but still, Rabbi Yochanan said everybody agrees. So my divrei hakol that Rabbi Yochanan said. Well, Rabbanan, the Gabi Rabbi Meir, divrei hakol who. Okay, what did they say? Right? The rabbi, it's what he was saying is that's the rabbi's position, which is the majority position. In other words, Rish Lakish quoted him the machloket the way we understood the machloket, that Rabbi Meir holds this and the rabbis hold that. And he said, oh, this seems to go only like Rabbi Meir. To which Rabbi Yochanan said, oh, it's flipped. The rabbis hold what Rabbi Meir holds, and Rabbi Meir holds what you thought the rabbis hold. Okay, they actually do disagree about this, and that matches where Rabbi Yochanan was quoted as saying to Rabbi Yana. But we still have some more problems. But what about the Braita? Okay, this is why I said we're going to unravel everything. What about the Braita? No, sorry. First of all, they say, what about our Mishnah? Right? Our Mishnah says, so they say, ipuch. Flip our Mishnah. What the rabbi said is put in the words of, right, we flip. Who said what? Vahatanya, what about the Braita? Ein nemanim lepaslo divrei Rabbi Meir. Chachamim omrim nemanim. Right? Everything lined up perfectly before. So now everything that lined up perfectly has to line up otherwise. So the Braita, again, ipuch. Switch who said what in the Braita, right? We switched who said what in the Mishnah. We switched who said what in the Braita. And now we have the bigger problem, which is, when we introduced Rabbi Yochanan, what did we say? He didn't think the machloket between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis was kiyum shtar. He thought the machloket was raya be'edim. And Rish Lakish was the one who thought it was kiyum shtar. Ipuch. Okay, switch that too. Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says kiyum shtar. Rabbi Rish Lakish is the one who said kiyum is raya be'edim. Okay, so there we did a whole unraveling of who said what, not only between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, but between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis, both in our Mishnah and in the Braita. And that was the only way to resolve this whole discussion that ensued between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, where Rabbi Yochanan seemed to say, right, something totally different than what he said earlier. With that, we'll finish for today. And we're going to pick up on this tomorrow because we still have some questions about this. Wishing everyone a good day and Shishma B'Sorot Tovot. See what the day brings.